Dani,
Yes.
thank you for coming onto my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
If I had to choose one guest that I thought was the most relevant to the unexplained infertility community, it would be you.
Oh, how sweet
Yeah,
of you to say that.
honestly, because not only did you do everything I asked you to do,
And more. And more.
yeah, there was one incident where I asked a lot from you and Antonio.
Uh-huh.
This is a clean podcast. This is rated clean. So I can't go into details, but
People can use their imagination.
They're going to probably now message me. They'll be like, what did you ask her to do? I'll do it. Just tell me.
Really close.
Really close. Not me. I was not involved.
Mm-mm.
No. But let's jump in. I'd love if we could because you're a very outspoken kind of gal.
I keep it real.
You do. And I would like to take advantage of that.
Sure.
From the standpoint of, I'd love to hear your story as a snapshot. And then I have questions that I think other people want to know. And that's not an educated guess. People have actually messaged me to ask about you. So,
my story as a snapshot?
As a snapshot.
Okay. How far back do you want me to start?
Let's start with when you decided you wanted to start trying.
So,
once upon a time.
Yeah. Well, except that it's not once upon a time because it's true.
Exactly.
Fun fact, I don't even think you know this, but there was a time where I didn't know if I wanted to have kids.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then I hit 33 and I was like, okay, no, we want to have children. This is a thing now. This is a big thing.
Was it because you met the right person? Or is it because your priorities shifted?
I think it was a combination of both, to be honest, because there was just something in me that all of a sudden I was like, no, there's more to life than just working and working and working. Like I was the person that was at 26, like I was working 15, 16, 18, 19 hours a day all the time. I was plugging 100-hour weeks by choice. Like I wasn't working at, a big firm that was required. I was an entrepreneur building a business, and I was by choice being like, I'm going to spend my whole weekend, every weekend, and all the nights and everything working. And then all of a sudden I was like, you know what? There's so much more that I feel like I can do and that I feel like life's purpose can be about rather than just doing that. And so,
was it an awakening or did something happen that was rather dramatic?
I think it was the fact that all of my friends around me started having children, and I started to be around more children, like little tiny humans.
Yes.
And then kind of recognize like, no, there is like a bug in me that really wants this. And then when I met Antonio, I was like, oh no, like we need to start soon because this is the real thing.
Wow.
In late 2018, I was having dinner with a couple of my friends, and one of them looked at me and said, you need to start trying now because you don't know how long it's going to take.
What kind of dinner was this where this was just this unsolicited advice was just thrown at you?
I mean,
like pass the hors d'oeuvres,
we were having this kind of conversation about like kids and houses and all the big adult stuff that you don't realize is really heavy when you're like 17, 18, you're like, raw, I'm going to be this like really amazing, successful person and live in this massive white picket fence house.
Yes.
And then when you're in your 30s, it's like, oh no, like these are really big things that require a lot of time and energy and money and all these things. So she said to me, you better start trying now because you don't know how long it's going to take. And like, that's my advice. And so that was, I think, November or December of 2018. So then in 2019, in January, we started. And I had this inkling, this might be a problem. I don't know why. I just had this like really small inkling in the back of my mind that was like, this might be a thing. We might run into problems here. And fast forward to just before the pandemic. I went to my GP, amazing GP. And she proactively did some testing and said, you may or may not have problems based on the results. It's kind of could be a thing. It kind of may not be a thing. So I'm going to refer you to a clinic in case you need it. So you have a referral in the back pocket. So then mid 2020 happens. We're in the middle of the pandemic. And I was like, this is not working. We've been a year and a half now at this. This is a problem. So then we go into the clinic.
The tiny voice is now like screaming at you.
Mm-hmm. I was like, I'm not getting any younger. This is a big thing. I'm closer to 40 than I am to 30. So like, uh-oh. And so we started that whole process, which turned into all the things of like, the first doctor we saw was like, you're not going to need IVF. Your numbers look really great, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward to, I don't even know how many cycles of like timed intercourse. Truly terrible.
My absolute favorite.
It's like the worst thing ever. And then it was, oh no, we're going to advance to IUI. Then I came to see you that first month.
I remember.
Of IUI. And you looked at me in that chair over there and you said, are you doing IVF? And I said, no, IUI. And you kind of called it that month. You're like, I think this is going to work. That month, got pregnant. And then we didn't. That was terrible. Terrible experience at the clinic, terrible feedback from the clinic, terrible everything.
Yeah, that biochemical was rough because you at that point had no guidance.
Zero.
And you had a negative blood type.
Oh, yeah.
And
this is a big thing.
It's a very big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you texted me and I said, what is your blood type? And you're probably thinking, this random witch is going to do some sort of weird voodoo transfusion.
Because it happened here. Remember?
Yes, I do. And you said, no, I have a negative blood type. And I said, you're going to need to go to the ER.
Yeah.
If your clinic isn't going to give you Rogam.
Immediately, basically.
And you didn't even know what that was.
Nope.
Which is bizarre because they had done all of your blood work. And I thought it would have been brought up, but it was not.
And the worst part, I think, was when they told me in the middle of the week that I was pregnant, their response to me was, come back on Monday, we're going to do another test. There was no, in case this happens between now and then. I didn't know what any of the numbers meant.
Yes.
I didn't know that my HCG was low than what it should be. So like all of these were flags and they didn't even have that sort of, if this happens, go here because our clinic is closed and you can't contact us on Saturday and Sunday.
Yes.
So thank God at that was the sort of pivotal moment that I was like, thank God I have you, because I didn't know what to do. And had I not gone, like, who knows what would have happened. But that was pretty terrible.
It's a small percentage. I think people think that if they don't get the Rogam, it's an absolute that future pregnancies will be compromised. It's actually a fairly small percent. But to me, when you're fighting for every percent to be in your favor, then we need to take care of the obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, that was the obvious. So, but that cemented our relationship.
Oh, it did. Because you were there. And it was when I realized, like, this is not a journey that anyone should feel like they have to take by themselves or just as a couple, but in this sort of siloed little isolated world. And yet I had this whole clinic of practitioners that were on my team, but they weren't actually there for me. They were just, that's when it really became obvious to me that the clinic side and the fertility side is much more like a game of numbers to them rather than like a human to human interaction. And the way that they said it, what they said to me when I came into the clinic on the Monday and said, like, it's not a thing. Like, I know it's not a thing because I just spent like all of Saturday night till 3:00 in the morning at the ER. And then I had to go back on Sunday. So we know it's not a thing, you know, and they just dismissed it completely and said what they, I think, thought was not terrible or harmful, but to someone who just went through a trauma like that. And obviously, like, this is peak COVID. This is like 2021 pre-vaccine when I'm by myself in the hospital. My partner's not even with me.
Yeah.
And the ER doctor says to me, well, this might be an ectopic. So we're going to take this seriously because you could be walking down the street and your fallopian tube could burst and then you die. And I was like, cool. So it's now 1 a.m. and you've just told me that I might die and I'm by myself.
Was he 12? He sounds like he was 12.
He was on the younger side, but he was like, we take this stuff seriously. I guess like, trying to reassure me that they weren't just kind of like punting my case.
Right.
But really I was like, cool.
Instilling confidence.
Mm-hmm. So you're just going to tell me that. And then you exit my ER room and I'm never to be seen of again. Thank God.
So if you're listening, please call in. We want to talk to you.
And so anyways, then fast forward and I spent a bunch of months just here.
Yes.
And you said to me, like, I get really good results. I have really good statistics. Come with me. Let's make it happen. So I did for, I want to say 6 months.
Yes.
May, June, July, August, September, October, November, 7 months.
We switched at one point to another clinic.
I did 2 more IUIs at that same clinic at the end of the year because I came in here and I said to you, like, we can't do this anymore. Like, this is destroying us.
Yes.
And then I got into a different clinic to go to the big guns of IVF.
Yes.
And
you did not want to go.
No, I did not want to go at all. I did not want to do IVF. That was like the one thing that I said to myself the whole time in this journey. At that point, I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm scared of needles. I am absolutely petrified of anything surgical or anything like that. I hate the sight of blood.
Yes.
So all of this is
bad,
terrible.
Though.
No, I was okay.
Yeah. You were shocked because you said that you wanted to go and that they had recommended IVF.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you were surprised that I said, yeah.
Yeah, I was not expecting that from you.
I think maybe it's a time to explore fertilization as a potential issue.
I was not very happy inside.
I know you weren't.
I was like, I was really hoping you were like, no, we don't need to do this. But you didn't.
Alas.
Say that. So then I go to this other clinic and I do a cycle of IVF with a practitioner who I will never recommend to anybody ever.
No.
Because it was a terrible experience. Physically, I was fine. But the experience through and through at that clinic was truly terrible. To this day, that doctor doesn't know what I look like at all. And we have been in the same room on multiple occasions and he has no idea that I was his patient. And there was so much oversight and so much what I felt like was an ego-driven sort of case. Like, oh, we'll just slot you in here because this is what you do or this is what we do.
You got a very cookie cutter IVF protocol for somebody who had very good AMH.
Yeah.
It was an odd choice by way of how high your stems were, which then did play out in terms of how you felt and the attrition rate of number of eggs that were actually retrieved, number of day 3s, number of
day
blasts,
5s,
number of euploids.
What is a euploid?
Like a PGT, a genetically normal embryo.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it was a very terrible result.
Like you were probably at one point a euploid embryo, meaning you have the correct number of chromosomes. Whereas there's questions about me. I feel like I began as a mosaic and I'm still
never know.
Trying to grow out of it.
You'll never know.
Yeah.
I think what was important for me to learn was that the fertility doctor was like, oh, this is what you have. Therefore, you're the best candidate for IVF. So we're going to move forward. We're not going to test your partner because
Yeah, no DNA
According to the other clinic, he has
fragmentation.
super sperm. Don't even get me started about that. And we're just going to plug away. And then I kept saying to him, like, what are the expected sort of results? And that's because I'm such a results driven person and I'm a problem solver every day in what I do. That's what was kind of fueling my energy to be like, we can do this. And every time I would go to get an ultrasound, I'd be like, oh, this is amazing. I'm doing, like, my body is reacting really well. This is amazing. And then the retrieval happened and we got a ton. I mean, I can say the numbers. I don't know if you want.
Yeah, no, please do.
So I got 18 retrieved, which apparently was amazing.
That's very good.
The fertility doctor wanted me to be in the 20s, but he was like, 18 is amazing. Then 15 were fertilized, which is also amazing.
Very good.
So I was like, yeah, gung ho, like we're ready to go. And then
That's an important clue though, as well, because you didn't do ICSI. So
no, I did 50-50.
You did 50-50.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had 50% that were ICSI,
Yes.
and then 50% that were regular IVF.
Yes.
Do you remember the
I do.
breakdown?
So 15 were fertilized, and then on day 3 it was 13.
Right.
On day 5 it was 13.
Very good.
On day 6, because there was some like really just sluggers in there, I had 4. And I lost it. And I was like, how do we lose 9 from day 5 to day 6? How does that happen? And out of the 4, 0% were regular IVF. And all 4 were ICSI. And I remember when I came in here, you basically turned around and said to me, that is a sign of his side, like the sperm side, not the egg side, which is me.
Right.
Because it had something to do with probably, which we still don't know to this day, DNA fragmentation. Which, if we go back into what he was doing at that time, cycling, you threatened to take away his bike.
In fact,
It was a big thing.
Looked up your address so that I could go and steal his bike. But I didn't do it.
Correct.
Because that would be insane.
I wouldn't have been mad if you did, though. It's okay.
No, so in terms of the DNA frag being an issue or not being an issue, this particular clinic uses the Zymot. So it's essentially like a screen that the little guys get to swim through in order as part of the selection.
And then they select it?
And then they use any sperm that got through the Zymot, and then they use the ICSI method with those sperm. So
that's so interesting.
It's very cool. But it's one of the only ways to determine whether or not DNA frag is an issue or not an issue, because if they're not testing it, it's one of the only methods that you can help the poor DNA sperm
out of the way.
They can't make it through the Zymot as well. And so you can see, okay, well, if it's selected using Zymot and then ICSI, then potentially DNA frag is an issue. Whereas if it was just regular ICSI without that step in between, everybody thinks that you can see the sperm and you have like a long stare and like really determine the best one and then try to retrieve that.
That's what I thought it was. I thought it was like through a little microscope, and it was like the beginning of Look Who's Talking Now, the movie. Well, so that's like what I picture in my head.
They definitely are choosing the best sperm, but it's not exact because they're moving so fast and they're so small. So essentially you're hoping that where you're putting the needle to get that sperm, you're hoping it's that same sperm. But if you imagine like a fish tank and you have millions of tiny fish and they're all moving, it's almost impossible to think that you're able to get that exact one. So it's not as guaranteed. But even then, like for issues where morphology is a factor in that they can't properly get into the egg, like we knew that his sperm were able to fertilize the egg because traditional IVF, where they're allowed to, fertilize the egg in a petri dish, essentially, still worked.
Yeah.
But the ones that were chosen after they had gone through this process
Mhm.
did much better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if
The
I was to
long
do
rant about sperm.
if I was to do it again, I would have done 100% ICSI.
Right.
And I feel like now everyone listening is going to be like, I'm going to go to my clinic and make sure it's Zymon, Dixie, blah, all this stuff.
It's funny because some clinics don't use ICSI at all. And then some clinics only use ICSI. And like a very select few now do 50-50.
I just sort of feel like once you're there, like I looked at the way I envision my fertility journey, and we're not even like at the good stuff yet.
Yes.
It's like a baseball field for some reason. That's how I picture it.
Right.
And like, you know, first base is like timed intercourse. Second base is IUIs. Third base is IVF. And third base is closest to home.
Right.
And so I just sort of feel like once you're sitting there, just like throw in all the things, like do all the things that you got to get us to home because we're that much closer. It's probably not the right way to look at it. But in my head, that's kind of how I logistically and like rationalized the journey was like, if I'm going to go all the way, at least we're like one step closer to home,
right.
to getting there. And fun fact, we weren't, but like,
you spoiled the ending.
But that's what I thought. Really, if we looked at my journey, there was probably like 6 bases before we got to home, but we made it. The other really big pivotal thing, which was kind of a game changer, was when you told me before my transfer, go get this blood work tested and all these like
your white blood cells.
Yeah.
The clotting factors.
Right. And
thrombophilia.
I went to go ask that specific fertility doctor who was my doctor, and he said, no, I will not do that. And it was actually quite rude. And it was very dismissive in that you're not willing to turn over every single stone to find out what is wrong with me. You just want to like shush me into the same cookie jar as everybody else, because if it doesn't work this time, eventually at some point it would work. That's
right.
what their mindset was. And so sure enough, we do the transfer and it doesn't work. And then I'm just like in a complete state of disarray because I had convinced myself if I'm going to go down the IVF train, it's going to work because it has to work. Because if it doesn't work, like there's no other choice. There's no other thing. Like we've done the 3 bases. There's no next step. And when I did my follow-up call with him, his suggestion and advice was, let's just do it again. Only let's do it natural with no medications. And I railed into him and basically said, like, at what point do you think that that's an acceptable piece of advice to offer? I said, I came to you because you're supposed to be the best clinic in the city. And I expected you to turn over every single stone and find out what is wrong, because according to everyone that's seen me, like there might be a problem, there might not be a problem, but all my numbers were good. Everything was great. Antonio had like super sperm. So he was off like, you know, riding the white horse,
biking
being like, this
away.
is amazing. I'm great. So there was no like issue that was prevalent as of yet. And you had flagged, I think this might be an immune system issue.
Well, so how I got to there and how I want people to start thinking of their fertility essentially is not a game, but a problem to be solved. And if we look at what we know versus what we don't know, what we knew about you was the 18-4 was actually pretty good. It sounds terrible it does. When you break it down to someone who thinks that IVF is home base, you know, like it's third and shortly thereafter should be home, aka your baby. That's fair. But in terms of breaking it down from 18-4, like that's following fertility math. Like
so he had told me, you're going to get between 8 and 9.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Because at the end, after genetic testing, I had 2.
But I mean, even that's 50%.
That I was expecting.
of the blasts.
Yeah.
When you look at it that way, you have to think to yourself, did you have 18 months of trying prior to that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. If you made genetically normal embryos, which you had proven to do in the stressed situation that is IVF, why wouldn't you be able to do the same thing in, the bedroom, if you will?
Mm-hmm.
If you're spicier, other places, like a park or an airplane, but whatever. But if you're looking at it from that angle of like 18 to 2,
mm-hmm.
technically, if we are using math, to me would mean that in 9 months, you should have been able to have made one genetically normal
I
embryo.
didn't even think of it like that. That's so interesting.
And so what I used to be, harping on about regularly was that fertilization, this is up until fairly recently when actually Pro-Fertile, the men's multivitamin, they did a study on impact of antioxidant supplementation on a sperm's ability to adequately fertilize an egg.
Right.
And if you're looking at your case, it's like, well, if the ones that were selected that had a lesser chance of DNA frag made it, it means that there were sperm there that could have done that. So if we're looking at you as a problem to be solved, in 9 months, you should have had a genetically normal embryo make it. If your uterus is as beautiful as they kept on telling us,
mm-hmm.
and there were no structural issues,
mm-hmm.
and you were an otherwise very healthy human being, then it really comes down to one or two things, either like an immune issue or a clotting issue. And
both of which he didn't want to test.
Neither of which he thought was relevant.
But then I went to my GP and I said, do these tests. And he wasn't very happy because my GP had now changed. So mainly I think because he was like, well, you're at a fertility clinic. Why wouldn't they do the testing? If they're not doing the testing, why do I have to do the testing?
It's a good question, sir.
Mm-hmm. And then his other thing was, I actually don't understand what half of these are because they're so specialized. That's not what a GP is trained in doing. So he agreed to run part of them. And his response to me the whole time was, I'm sure you're fine. Like, this is were elevated. And I was like, so where's the I'm sorry for gaslighting you because I didn't believe that there was something wrong. None of that happened, but that's beside the point. Sort of a lesson to every practitioner out there. Maybe don't gaslight your patients. Just a thought.
Or you could be like my practitioner who she's best. She'll just give me referrals.
She's just an enabler.
I just recently got a psychiatric referral that I didn't even ask for.
She might be trying to tell you something.
No.
Well, that sparked a move to a different clinic. So now we're getting to clinic number 3, practitioner number 4. And we are 3.5 years in to this. Yeah, 3.5 years in. Oh my gosh.
At this point, you were really down.
Yes. Although if you saw me in daily life, you would have no idea.
You would have no idea.
But it was...
But judging from when you first started seeing me to when you started at that last clinic, you were a very different person.
Yeah.
And you were scared.
I had the discussion with my partner about where do we draw the line? Because, and I'll say this openly to anyone, fertility is for the privileged. And that's terrible to have to say. But it is so expensive and there's no support. Even though they're like, oh, yes, there's one government funded cycle. Don't get it wrong. It's still over $10,000 for a government funded cycle, which again is for the privileged when groceries cost hundreds upon hundreds of dollars every time you go. And it's extremely time consuming, and the emotional stress that it puts on you as a human being and you as a couple in your relationship is probably some of the most difficult to work through. So we had a pretty open forum discussion over where do we draw the line. And we had said, if this last clinic doesn't work, if what we are about to go do and throw everything at doesn't work, like that's the end of it for us, because then it's just not in the cards for us. And I think everyone that's on that journey has to have that conversation at some point, because if you don't, the sacrifice is too big of what is going to happen to your mental health, of what's going to happen to your finances, of what's going to happen to your emotional well-being, to your relationship. Like, the last thing that I wanted it to do was destroy a relationship or destroy me as a human. And I started becoming a different version of myself that was unable to hide the stuff that I was going through. So I was so much more easily triggered, which I'm not an easily triggered person at all. Like, I'm a very calm, I'm not a reactive person. And I became someone who, like, you could mention the word baby or kids, or like literally say, you know, are you going to have kids, or when are you going to have kids, or be talking about it. And I would just lose myself and I would be uncontrollable. And that for me was a massive sort of pivotal point where I was like, I can't do this any longer. So when we went to clinic number 3, and you had said to me, it's your immune system. Like, there's something up with your immune system. And clinic number 2 looked at me when I told him that, like I had 12 heads, and was like, no, let me debunk this myth for you, and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, with all due respect, like, your suggestions didn't work. So we're going to go and see what we can do to get it to work. So we get to clinic number 3.
Which honestly, we were able to move there so easily because of a mutual friend.
Yes.
That
she's wonderful.
She now takes credit for your baby.
I know.
Like, entirely. She was here.
I ran into her here a couple weeks ago.
She almost stole him.
Also super funny and offside.
She listens to this podcast, so she's a psycho.
Listen, she's amazing, and I'm so grateful because she pushed that so hard. And then when they told me, okay, the next appointment isn't until, like, I think it was September, I was like, absolutely not. Like, we need to go now, because this is happening now or never. So I got it in July, and then we started protocol in August. And so she did all the testing of my immune system. I think they're the only clinic in Canada that does this. I think.
No, there's another as well.
So this clinic,
yes,
they did this immune testing, and my results came back, and all 3 metrics were elevated.
Problematic. Specifically your lad.
All I know is that they were all problems. And she said to me, all 3 are a problem. So we need to fix this. But basically her average person explanation was that my immune system is hyperactive. And anytime that there is a foreign substance, i.e. sperm, my body goes into overdrive and attacks them and kills them, which would explain why nothing worked, even the IVF, because there is a foreign thing being implanted into my body. And then I looked back to, okay, well, if that's the case, then, like, no matter how many IVF sessions I did, they wouldn't have worked.
That's right, Dani.
This is where you need to have a very serious conversation about your finances come into play.
What do you mean?
Because every time you do a transfer, it's $1 bajillion. And, like, last time I checked, the average person doesn't have $150,000 to do.
Well, especially if that wasn't ever the issue. So, but I'm going to get into science geek mode.
Let me have it. I want
because it's important only because a lot of clinics now claim to not need immune testing because they say that they can treat without having test results.
I am
like-
the poster child for you need immune testing.
So like a blanket immune protocol involves, for example, prednisone, Claritin, and Pepsid.
Claritin, of which I was on. Didn't work.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
But that is because most of the clinics that claim to be treating a prospective immune issue, especially when they're getting ready to do a frozen embryo transfer, they're not, because they're not doing the LAD. So what was most important for you was your LAD, because you then had to do the LIT.
That's right.
Which most clinics are just doing the CPP or the Claritin, Pepsid, prednisone. Or at best, they might add intralipids as sort of like a benign treatment.
Which I did too.
Which you did too.
Yeah.
But for you, we knew that you really needed it.
Yeah.
As opposed to, hey, you've had X number of failed transfers at this point. Let's throw the kitchen sink at you, which is my least favorite. Here we are, the LAD. Are you ready?
Yeah.
It requires a sample of blood from both the perspective the level of blocking antibodies in the prospective mother in terms of your blood to samples of a white blood cell from the prospective father or the donor. And low levels of blocking antibodies are associated with a higher rate of miscarriage and implantation failure. So you were then treated with the LIT, which is the lymphocyte immunization therapy.
That's right.
Which is very controversial because there's not sufficient testing by way of using it for fertility. And the LIT is just one type of immune therapy, used specifically when you have a positive LAD, which is important because if you're just giving patients prednisone, it's not going to be an adequate treatment.
Funnels back to this cookie cutter case, is that when doctors and specialists don't actually know what's wrong, they're like, oh, we're just gonna try this, and then we're gonna try that, and then we're gonna try this. We're not actually looking and doing the testing to figure out where the problem lies. They're just going through the motions because they know, at least this is what I've based my conclusion on through my experience, that at the end of the day, every time they just like suggest something else, you are in the most vulnerable state emotionally. You're by far at a place, since you're already at a clinic, where like you are putting your trust in these experts to find the solution. And they know that once they have you, where else are you going to go? So they can just keep treatment after cycle, after IVF, whatever, until it works, because it's kind of the end of the road when it comes to fertility prior to like surrogacy, which is still in that same category. And to them, every time they do that, they're making money. And that's the way that at least it felt up until this third clinic, that it was just like, oh, well, we'll just go through the motions. And in these motions, we're making, I don't even know how much money off me, but probably a lot, considering part of the treatments and ultrasounds and blood work are all covered by the government. So they're just like funneling through. And we're not going to actually take the time to figure out how to explain the unexplained. And if it doesn't work, we're going to try it again. And if that doesn't work, we're going to keep trying it again. Because to them, being a very, very good practitioner would be finding the problem and the solution, which may end up in them not making as much money, because maybe they don't need to put you through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cycles of IVF. And that's really how I view it. Is it's turned into, and maybe I'm wrong, but it feels to a patient who's been through multiple clinics and multiple practitioners like they've lost the plot. Did you get into the business because you actually want to find success for all of your patients and get them pregnant? Or did you get into the business because it is a very financially successful and sound business that also happens to help families build, their respective goals when it comes to having children. To me, the latter seems what has happened is that there's a financial motivation rather than a like human to human. I'm in this with you. I'm in the trenches with you. I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. Let's find that solution and then figure out the course of treatment. And that's where, truthfully, like you come into play, is you treat your patients like real people. We're not numbers to you. You have so much care in trying to understand the case for every single person. And not only that, being there for as an advocate and being there as a cheerleader and being there as a source of like, I don't even want to say inspiration, but just a source of security in knowing that like when you feel like you're sitting alone on this island and everything around it is dark or you're falling into the deepest, darkest hole, you're this like little chipper bunny that's like, no, we are going to find the solution. We're going to find what's wrong because I know that this is probably what's wrong. And I also know who to go to fix it. So at this third place that you recommended that we got into because of our mutual friend, they did that. And then we did the treatment. And this was now in the fall of 2022. So we're approaching 4 years. And then you do the test, you do this whole LIT treatment, which is wild. Not nearly as bad as IVF, I have to say. And my fertility doctor said to me, your results came back amazing. All 3 problematic issues have now been brought down into the normal range. So
what do they do when
in
you
LIT?
Yes.
So they take your partner's blood. They take a lot of his blood.
Right.
They whip it up and they separate, I think, the white blood cells from the red blood cells, something like that, and create like a plasma, I think. And you go in and they take your forearms, the way it looks like allergy testing, and they inject you in 4 spots that look like a square in both arms. And your body essentially starts having an allergic reaction. So it feels like 4 pretty significant bee stings. And then they look like pretty significant bee stings and they are itchy AF. It's so bad in that way. You cannot treat them with anything. You cannot put ice on it. You cannot scratch it. You can't, literally, you just have to like ignore it. And I think truly that my type A personality and all the crap they had been through up until then allowed me to be able to just like, no, I will not touch this. But it's all you want to do is scratch. It's like the world's worst black fly bite times 8.
Picturing you like Phoebe in that Friends episode where she gets chicken pox.
Yeah, kind of.
With the masking tape.
I literally, to go to sleep, I had to take the sheets and wrap my arms in them. And
so you
like
were Phoebe.
Because I was like, I will scratch these in my sleep. And then I did interlipids, and then you go back and you do that treatment again the second time, I think 3 weeks later.
Because of your elevated NK cells.
Yes. And then they do it again, and I had a much lighter reaction, which is a very good sign. And essentially what they said to me was, it's like your body is getting used to this specific substance.
Leukocyte.
Sure. And the more that it's exposed to it, the better your body will react to it. It won't have such a prolific, angry reaction. It will be more accepting. So then after the second time, you wait 3 weeks and then you get tested, the same initial test, you get tested again. And then they send that off. And my results came back normal, which means that my body was now accepting his blood.
Yes.
Substance.
Yes.
I will say that because I had
passed your
ROGAM,
lad.
I had to get the ROGAM shot during it, which was truly probably the worst part.
Really?
Mm-hmm, because you have to go to the hospital and sit in the ER and wait. They cannot give it to you at the clinic.
Right.
Because it's a blood product.
Yes. I am also Rh negative. My least favorite part of getting it was after miscarriages, having to sit
Mm-hmm.
in the labor and delivery,
Mm-hmm. That's where they sent me.
waiting for my ROGAM amongst
All the pregnant people.
my very pregnant friends.
Then she said to me, and this was in November, she said, okay, when's your next day one? And I think I said to her December 3rd. It might have been December 1st, maybe December 1st. And she said, okay, we're going to do an IVF transfer, an FET transfer. So call the clinic and then we're going to book it. But they closed on, I remember this, they closed on December 23rd for the holiday. This is what it was. And if my day one came December 3rd or later, it was a problem because when you do the math as to when the transfer would have happened, they would have been closed, which would have then screwed up everything. So we had a very small window to make it happen. And I asked her, like, what should we do in between now and then? And she said, you're welcome to keep trying. It's only like 3 weeks or something like that. So
challenge accepted.
I will see you in December. And I said, great. And then November 30th came, the day before. And I said to you said to me, actually, come see me and I'm going to make sure you get your period so that we can make sure that this transfer happens this month and we don't have to delay it till January. And I said, okay. And you said to me, do a pregnancy test before just to be safe. I sort of knew because 2 days prior and the night prior, I had a glass of wine in my hands because I was hosting 2 events. And I got an immediate full body nauseous, I'm going to throw up. And that's never, ever, ever happened because I love wine. And I was like, something is wrong. Something is off. This is weird. Because it was like nauseous and dizzy. And then it went away after like 5 minutes. And I was like, this is bizarre. Thought I was dehydrated because I'm a camel. So I drank some water, went away. I was like, okay. And then that morning, I took an Amazon pregnancy test, like the little stupid stick, took a shower, got out of the shower, and there was 2 lines. And I was like, oh shit. And my partner was in the basement and I texted him a picture and I was like, oh dear. And then I texted you saying, help, because I didn't know if this was actually happening. And your response was, go to Shoppers, get the digital test immediately. Do not pee, nothing, come back, do it again.
Main dehydrated.
Yes, because I was technically 1 day before my day one, which is technically like easily a few days before any normal person would test. Because I was like before my missed period, right? So that little digital test came back with that word that said pregnant, and I just about fainted. And at this time, my partner was at work, and I texted him that photo, and he could not focus for the rest of the day.
I wept.
Oh, I was crying.
In my car.
I was like, I can't even believe this is happening. Like, how does this happen that 4 years have now gone by? Because this is literally November 30th. And we discussed this first in 2018 in like November. And I had been through 4 IUIs. I had been through multiple timed intercourse. I had been through 4 practitioners at 3 different clinics, 1 major cycle of IVF, which failed. I had eggs in the freezer. I was ready to do a transfer, did the immune testing, fixed that, poof. Like just poof. Not even a month went by. Literally 2.5 weeks went by. And it was poof. You're pregnant. And so I had to call them instead of my day one. I was like, well, I'm positive and I don't know what to do. So then what I really appreciated from this clinic was they treated it as if it was a high risk immediately. And so I did another, I think, full round or maybe 2 rounds of intralipids immediately to continue that course of treatment. And I was back there much more frequently in the first 12 weeks than any other typical sort of normal pregnancy to test for HCG and ultrasounds and all that. So it was a very, very, very good experience. And truly, I think the only clinic that came at it from the perspective of we are going to find what's wrong and we're going to fix what's wrong. We're not going to go and just throw spaghetti at the wall and see which one sticks. We're actually going to be proactive and look for the problem and then find the solution for that problem and then take it from there. And in my case, and I don't know if this has happened with anyone else's, that solution fixed everything.
I think the way that you just described having this one treatment and then it fixing it, poof, is something that is also so hard for patients to accept.
Yeah.
Because they were at third base.
Yep.
They didn't even need to be on a baseball diamond.
Well, this
in
is
the first
just it.
place.
And I will tell you that both Antonio and I we went through quite a long stage of being very angry. Even though we were supposed to be like happily celebrating, this like little bean, as I called him, Olive, that was growing.
Yeah.
There was a very significant amount of time where we were like, we did not have to spend all that time and all of that money if the very first practitioner that we saw took this analytical, proactive approach to me and us as a couple and the case. And that for me was probably where I realized the most that like clinics are not out there doing that and being the best doctors they can be. They're taking, here's what we normally do, and we're just going to do it on you. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to go to this next page and we're going to do that because that's what it is. And to be totally transparent, if that's how everyone looked at their job, there would be no experts. There would be no like modern day inventions. There would be no unicorn businesses. There would be nothing of notoriety because everyone would just be average. And the amount of people that would get fired or the amount of companies that would fire their clients or have clients fire them would be obscene because that's just not how experts and practitioners or, lawyers or other doctors or in myself in the PR world work. Like if I don't deliver results, I don't have clients. It works like that. But it's very odd to me that in the fertility sort of landscape, if you don't deliver results, it doesn't matter. People just keep coming.
So I have a lot of physician patients. They are hit the hardest by this realization because in their line of expertise, they can't imagine giving a cookie cutter approach to their patients. And it was really interesting. I had another REI from the States on for the second episode.
Oh, the endo guy?
The endo guy.
He was really good.
And he said, essentially with a lot of IVF, like 50% of the time it doesn't work. And like that's the game. And it's sort of like, I was stunned.
Yeah.
And because that stat is not one that's thrown around. And
no one tells you that statistic.
No.
In fact, I think people actually, the stat that I think I was told by that IVF practitioner was 70-30.
But it gives IVF a bad rap because it shouldn't be 50-50.
No.
And it wouldn't be if it was given to those where it was truly necessary.
Yeah.
And as an option, as a protocol, even IUI, for instance. Like when everybody goes off about how IUI is a useless treatment, it's not.
I actually think IUI...
It's helpful. It's a helpful
it's very
treatment
helpful
for men who have high sperm counts and very low motility. And that's how it should be used. And when it's not being used that way, and instead it's being used as a precursor because it's necessary for insurance, for instance,
through the steps,
then it's going to fail because it's not doing anything more than timed intercourse if it's not for male factor.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
And what's interesting is my first fertility doctor, who actually I liked, I think he was getting out of the field, which is why there was two in his same practice.
Right.
gave me an article on how good red wine was. And I was like, you're my best friend. And then also gave me an article on how IUI has like an 80-something% success rate. If you get to like 3 or 4, I think the max that they suggested was 4 cycles before moving into the IVF realm. And
I've never
it was like
heard
a
that
whole,
stat.
I'll find the paper. I think I still have it in my fertility folder.
Because maybe that would be the case if it was for just for male factor.
I think
for
they
that
kind of
specific
we're
issue.
looking at it like the same way as like if you try 1 month and you don't get pregnant just like naturally, that doesn't mean that it's never going to work. You have to, typically the average person has to try a few months.
Yes.
And I think he was looking at it the same way where, you know, like you do it once, twice, 3 times. By the 4th time, it should work. There should be like an 80-something kind of like over,
right.
I don't, whatever
like
that
if there's
chart
something
is.
to solve
Yeah.
for.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I don't think it helped that in the first time that I did it, it worked and then it didn't. Because then he was kind of like, well, it worked. Let's do it again.
That was
like,
my clue. That was my first clue.
Yeah. And that didn't even like remotely exist in their minds. There was like, oh no, let's just do it again. So, you know, then we do it 4 times and it never worked ever again. And they were shocked that it never worked. Like I remember going in January. This was the 4th time. And I was now at the 2nd practitioner at that first clinic. And even she was shocked when I came in for my pregnancy test. And she was like, this is, you know, like she was really like, yeah, rah, rah. And then when it was like, no, she was like, what? Like, this is, huh? And I was like, well, if I've stumped you, we have a problem because
Gotta go.
that the fertility scape needs like a serious overhaul of the approach, which would require a lot more, I think, individualistic time spent on per case.
Honestly, it should just be part of a public system
100%.
because then there would be a lot more individual care plans.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, even if you look at it from the perspective of if a patient feels as though the practitioner is being financially motivated by a result, they have less faith and trust in that practitioner.
Yeah, of course.
And that's psychology.
It's terrible.
Whereas if you feel as though your practitioner believes in you and you believe in them and that there is no financial motivation, you as the patient are more likely to get better results.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, ultimately, the public system is already a mess, so we can't rely on it. But if it was more publicly available and not in this, I take a lot of offense to the idea of IVF being funded, being the solution to Canada's fertility qualms.
No.
Like when I'm on panels and that's the suggestion, like what would change the face of Canadian fertility?
So much.
Well, if we funded IVF like more fervently, absolutely not.
Mm-mm.
That is solved for nothing. If we were responsible for positive outcomes and it had to be delivered in a format where patients could see the stats for every single clinic in terms of number of patients pregnant without IVF.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for reproductive immunology to be part of the criteria for a clinic to be open instead of this outdated concept of like, I don't believe in reproductive immunology.
Well, that
like,
I think that's the most frustrating thing is when you get a practitioner that's just so close-minded into what the current research is showing or even just doing current research in general and actually being open to like being on the cusp of the future of medicine. And there's nothing stopping that given practitioner from taking in patients because at that clinic, like I didn't have a choice. When I was referred to the 2nd clinic that did my IVF, there's tons of doctors there. Like I want to say 9, maybe more, probably more. When you get the call that you're now becoming a patient, they just slot you in with a doctor and you don't have the opportunity to do any back end sort of like research approval, whatever. And in what industry does that actually exist? Like, I don't just get slotted in with the lawyer that I want to hire, because lawyers are also ridiculously expensive, and then expect whoever that lawyer is to be an amazing lawyer. I want to make sure that lawyer specializes in what I need and actually is going to deliver results. And I want to know, does this lawyer actually have proven results? Like, what is that success rate? What does that look like? Do I even like this person? Because when you're dealing with, and I've said this before, the two most vulnerable things in a person's life is children and money, or our children and money. And in this case, for everyone going through fertility, you're dealing with that deep rooted emotional trauma of wanting a child, but not having one. And you will do anything they tell you. Cut to, I went on my immune diet thanks to you.
Hey, girl.
To have a kid, and I will throw all of the money at the wall to make this happen if I believe it's gonna happen.
Hey, to be fair, your physician at the other like wonderful clinic is now giving that diet you hated so much to other patients with elevated cytokines.
That diet was so hard.
And it did not involve red wine.
No, but I still drank it. I was like, how much do I need to stick to it? Because red wine is not an option in my life to not have. And you actually told me we're going with like a 70-30, maybe 60-40. Like, can't have tomatoes, can't have gluten, can't have cheese. Well, guess what? I'm marrying a Sicilian. That makes up his diet. Like, bread, pasta, tomatoes, because tomato sauce, bolognese, all that stuff, and cheese.
I was about to be
like, the man does not eat
say,
green.
Good thing you're not eating him, Dani. No wonder you were allergic to him.
Right? And then I remember coming in one day and being like, oh, so I can have like salad with lemon and olive oil. And you were like, you can't have lemon. I'm like, well, what am I supposed to put on my salad?
Oil.
Olive oil.
Just oil
Period.
on lettuce.
That's it. No vinegars, nothing. That was probably the hardest part, because I was like, so I'm living on cucumber and lettuce and like
olive oil,
snap peas and olive oil.
And it made a tiny olive.
And he made an olive. And he's amazing. And
Yes.
I'm very, very blessed and very lucky. And I have you to thank. And you're like his aunt.
Wow.
Yeah. I
I
called you
feel-
the third parent. Life up until you that had any inkling of that being in existence or being a part of my case.
You know what, though? You were willing to do things, and you were willing to fail and get back up and keep going. And that is something that I run into a lot, where a patient is afraid to do something because if it fails, they feel like that is the end. Whereby that's not the case. If something fails, that's another clue.
Yeah.
And so we followed the clues.
6 spaces later, we got to home.
Dani, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Giving
truly.
me your story, giving everybody so much hope.
I hope that my story gives people hope.
No, it's unturning a stone that I think is applicable to so many.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll hopefully start more and more conversations and more demand. Because if there's demand that is public, there will hopefully also be solutions.
100%. I'm here for that. Let's change it.